The President will sign it. Act now. Vote for the substitute. I yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized for 4 3/4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I travel around Michigan in my district, the 4th Congressional District of Michigan, I often hear from many families that they think America's at a crossroads. They really question, is the American dream, is that dream that their children and grandchildren are going to have the opportunities that they had, is that dream still alive for their kids and their grandkids? And the reason they ask that is because we've been on the economic path that the majority has established for the last 3 years. And we've seen the slowest recovery from any recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment is still too high. I think maybe being from Michigan, I'm particularly sensitive to that because we've had tough times for more than a decade. We need to get people back to work. We need to get jobs growing in this country. There's really a choice. Which path are we going to be on? Which road are we going to take? Which lane are we going to be in? Are we going to be in the lane where we just simply raise taxes? Whether what segment it is, I don't care, name the segment, but one that we know will cost us 700,000 jobs? Or we go down a path where we extend current law for 1 year, as many bipartisan experts have called for. Even President Bill Clinton has called for it. The President's former economic advisor, Larry Summers, has said, let's extend current law for a year. Let's take the uncertainty out. And in the 20 hearings we've had on tax reform this year in the Ways and Means Committee, so many employers, so many tax experts, so many independent groups have come forward and said the uncertainty of all this expiring tax policy is causing a huge problem. And my friends would say, well, if only we raise taxes on people that, small businesses and others that make $250,000, that'll solve our problems. Well, it won't. That's just a piece of it. The code is so complex. 5,000 changes over the last decade. I often say it's 10 times larger than the Bible, with none of the good news. The burden that this tax code is placing on our economy, it's a huge wet blanket. Our GDP growth is just barely over 1%, the gross domestic product. Our economy is not growing enough. And if we don't grow our economy, we can't create the jobs that we need, that are so desperate. Let's work together. Let's pass this one-year extension. Tomorrow we have a package that will lay out our principles for comprehensive tax reform, that will also lay out a process to expedite this next year in the House and Senate. We've been working with the Senate to establish these procedures. They will go through regular committee in an open and transparent way, not just roll a bill out on the floor and say, oh, if we only ding that one segment, things will be okay. Let's do this the right way. This is the greatest country in the world. Let's make this the greatest economic power in the world. Let's reform our tax code for the first time in 26 years. Let's make it a pro-growth, modern code that lets our U.S. companies compete around the world, lowers rates, make it simpler for people to file their taxes, lessens that burden, lessens that uncertainty, and creates 1 million jobs in the first year alone. It's very clear which path we need to choose. Reject this substitute. Support H.R. 8. Get on the right path. Get on the path to job creation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
Senate 1959, an act to require a report on the designation of the Haqqani Network as a foreign terrorist organization and for other purposes.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to rule, the previous question is ordered on the bill and on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Yes, for a recorded vote.
Gentlemen, request the yeas and nays. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The tax cuts passed during the Bush administration in 2001 and 2003 are set to expire at the end of this year. The House has spent the afternoon debating extending those tax cuts. One version, the version you just heard from the Democrats, similar to what the Senate passed last week, which would apply to incomes of $250,000 or less. The Republican plan would cover all income levels and extend it through 2013, as would the Democratic plan. This is a vote on the Democratic plan, the Levin Amendment, the substitute amendment. Earlier today in the rule debate on the bill, they passed an amendment to the rule which would allow, upon passage, if upon passage of the Republican plan, they would combine it with the tax reform package that's set to come up for debate tomorrow. Leader Hoyer talked about that in some of the debate on the Democratic amendment just a short while ago. And to get some details on both today's bill and tomorrow's tax reform bill, we spoke this afternoon to a tax reporter. Heather Rothman, tax reporter with Bloomberg BNA. What is this debate over extending tax cuts really all about?
What you're going to see today really is just largely a political vote so that members can go back and campaign on this. You're going to see the complete opposite of what happened last week in the Senate. Basically today the House is going to pass a Republican plan that would extend all of the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts for all taxpayers, and then you're going to see them defeat a Democratic plan that would extend the tax cuts for all taxpayers but total tax cuts for 98% of the taxpayers, which basically means that they've set an income threshold. So for this would cover individuals' income up to $200,000 and married couples' income up to $250,000.
Was it a surprise at all that the House Republicans allowed the Democratic proposal, the one passed in the Senate, to be brought up in the House today?
No, not so much. You know, they really want these votes taken here. They're political votes. They wanted to go back, be able to campaign and say, look, Democrats are willing to raise taxes on the upper income families, and you know, Democrats also want to see these Republican votes because they want them to go back and say, look at this, Republicans are willing to cut taxes on the wealthy while letting taxes expire on the middle class. There's a bunch of things in that Republicans left out of their bill, like that would help, you know, college students and the American Opportunity Tax credits, and some enhancements to the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit that Republicans did not include in their plan.
How many Republican votes is the Democratic proposal likely to attract, and likewise, how many Democratic votes is the Republican plan going to get?
I don't think you'll see any Republicans vote for the Democratic plan. You'll probably see just a handful, not very many, of politically imperiled Democrats vote for the Republican plan.
How much is that Republican plan going to cost?
The Republican plan would cost about $400 billion, while the Democratic plan would cost about $250 billion. They're not entirely accurate when you look at them. They're apples to oranges. The Republican plan does include a patch for the alternative minimum tax for 2 years, whereas the Democratic plan includes it for 1 year. The Republican plan addresses the estate tax, but the Democratic plan does not address it, and leaders have said that they would look to address that later on in the year.
Why do Republicans say it's important to extend the tax cuts for all income levels? Democrats are saying it's the $250,000 income level.
Republicans are saying, look at this weak economy, this poor economy. If you raise taxes on people, it's going to severely impact the small businesses who file their tax returns through the individual side of the tax code. Democrats say, if we spend this money on the upper 2% who make a significantly higher portion of money than a lot of, you know, than the 98%, well, then you're going to imperil our ability to address these issues and long-term fiscal issues down the road.
Another tax bill coming up in the House on Thursday dealing with tax overhaul. What's the bill designed to do?
The bill basically sets the tone and the parameters for next year's tax reform debate. What Republicans hope to do with the extension of the tax cuts for 1 year through 2013 is use that as a bridge to get to tax reform. But what they've gone and done with this tax reform process bill that you'll see the vote on tomorrow is that they've included a bunch of standards that a tax reform bill to come to the floor would have to include. And some of those include moving to a territorial tax system from the current worldwide tax system for our businesses. It includes dropping the current tax rates down to 2 tax rates, and includes other things like setting the corporate tax rate at a maximum of 25%. That bill does not spell out how they're supposed to get there and what tax expenditures they'd have to eliminate from the code. Democrats don't support some of those things, and Democrats will say on the floor tomorrow that this bill is going to shut them out of the process and shut down deliberations in the House.
An update on the House tax bills from Heather Rothman, tax reporter with Bloomberg B&A. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That tax reform bill coming up on the House floor tomorrow. The House is in early tomorrow. They'll get underway at 9 o'clock Eastern, and what should be the last day of legislative work before the August recess. On the floor now, they're voting on the Democratic substitute, the Democratic tax cut plan, extending the Bush-era tax cuts for incomes up to $250,000. It would also raise the top rate on capital gains and dividends. They'll vote on the Republican plan coming up shortly. Throughout the debate this afternoon, we've been keeping our eye on Twitter at twitter.com/C-SPAN, and the hashtag we're following this afternoon, tax cuts. Jimmy Mays tweets in that Mr. Tom Reed from New York, he says there's a way around this Bush tax cuts deal, and that is take the 100-plus-year-old refundable tax credit from big oil. Timothy O'Brien says we need tax cuts for all, including the rich. Let's fire Obama and hire Gary Johnson. E.I. DeLong, in a tweet to the Republican leader, said the second round of Bush-era tax cuts occurred in 2003 with extensions. Why were jobs lost during 2007-8 when the 2% had money? And Pat Gooley tweeting this afternoon, they are not tax cuts, they are the current rate. Democrats want to raise taxes. Again, the Twitter hashtag we're following is tax cuts. And here's a look at some of the debate from earlier this afternoon. We'll show you what we can as this vote continues.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 8, the Jobs Protection and Recession Prevention Act. In doing so, I and my fellow Republican House colleagues have made an important choice, the choice to focus on job creation. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who oppose this important piece of legislation have made a different choice, the choice to focus on tax hikes that destroy jobs. The Jobs Protection and Recession Prevention Act stops the tax hike we face at the end of the year and provides a one-year extension of the low tax policies originally enacted in 2001 and 2003, and then extended again in 2010. The 2010 bill was supported by 85 current House Democrats, 40 current Senate Democrats, and President Obama. Importantly, this legislation allows Congress time to pass and enact comprehensive tax reform without causing undue harm to our fragile economy. Economists have noted that comprehensive tax reform, when paired with appropriate government spending cuts, could lead to the creation of 1 million American jobs in the first year alone. The choice Republicans have made is to pass this bill, work toward comprehensive tax reform, and create jobs. In contrast, my Democrat colleagues have proposed raising taxes. They claim the tax hike will only affect the rich. What they don't want to tell you is that in reality, this tax hike will hit nearly 1 million small businesses and 53% of small business income. A study conducted by Ernst & Young concluded that the Democrat tax hike could lead to the loss of over 700,000 jobs. That's the choice that Democrats have made, to raise taxes on families and small businesses and destroy jobs. America is at a crossroads, as this chart illustrates. And the question is, which path will our country take? The Democrats' path includes tax hikes that will cause small businesses to lose 700,000 jobs, or the Republicans' tax reform path that will make the tax code simpler and fairer and lead to the creation of more than 1 million jobs in the first year. What's even worse is that in their quest to raise taxes on the so-called wealthy, several of my Democrat colleagues have made it clear that they're willing to hold low and middle-income Americans hostage by threatening to let all taxes rise as scheduled at the end of the year if they don't get their way. Now, these massive and imminent tax hikes are part of the fiscal cliff, or jobs cliff, as I often refer to it, that we face at the end of this year. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that going over the fiscal cliff could cost America 2 to 3 million jobs. This would be a devastating blow to almost 13 million Americans who are unemployed, as well as to the middle class Americans who have been struggling in the Obama economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, the choice to me is obvious. Let's pass this bill. Let's work toward comprehensive tax reform that creates a simpler, fairer tax code for all Americans, most importantly, that creates the jobs we so badly need. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reconsider their choice to increase taxes and destroy over 700,000 jobs. Now's not the time to dig the hole we're in any deeper. Instead, Democrats should take the advice of people like President Bill Clinton and former economic advisor to President Obama, Larry Summers, and join Republicans to stop the tax hike, work to strengthen our economy, and get our country back on track. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I yield myself such time as I shall consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
There is a choice to be made here, and it isn't what the chairman has put forth for 1 second. Everyone in this body agrees that we should extend the middle class tax cut. The Senate passed a bill that does just that. The President is ready to sign it this week. The middle class families of this country need certainty, not some vague promises about something to be done in the future. So the question is, if everybody agrees that we should continue the middle class tax cut, why don't we come together? And the answer is this. The Senate bill continues all of the tax cuts for every American household on their first $250,000 of income. 114 million families would see their tax cuts extended in full. 97% of small businesses would keep all of their tax cuts, according to the Joint Tax Committee. 97%. So why don't the Republicans join us in acting? I think the answer is clear. This chart shows it. They're insistent. Their priority is cutting taxes for the very wealthy. They want to give households that earn more than $1 million a year a tax cut on average of $160,000. This chart shows it. What we have here for middle-class families, $2,200. For the very wealthy, $160,000. That's over 70 times more a tax cut for millionaires than for typical families. And what makes it worse, if possible, is it would add $49 billion to the deficit. This Republican bill also would raise taxes on 25 million families. 25. Those who've benefited from the EITC, from the child tax credit, and a higher education tax cut, which they would credit that they would eliminate altogether. And it's still worse. The bill we're going to discuss tomorrow, so-called tax reform, essentially would provide someone earning more than $1 million a $331,000 tax cut. This debate is not about tax reform. It's about whether or not we protect the very wealthy at all costs. At all costs, for middle-income families, for everybody except the very wealthy. This talk about 700,000 jobs being lost. That study, financed by special interest friends, it's been discredited by every fact checker. And you know, they're talking about 70 times more for the millionaire than for middle-income families on average, when in 2011, 93% of income growth went to the top 1% of wealthy households. 93%. And they come here and say, as their first priority, is protecting the very wealthy. No, this isn't about tax reform. We need to work on this. This is about whether the first priority of the Republicans is protecting the very wealthy, holding hostage middle-income families. Let the middle-income family hostages be released. Be released. Join together for what everybody says they're for. Let's pass today our substitute and give a middle-income tax cut to everybody, including 97% of small businesses. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you. At this time, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Health Subcommittee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Herger.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this House must act to stop the midnight tax hike that threatens to hit all American taxpayers on December 31st. This midnight menace includes a 50% cut in the value of the child tax credit, higher taxes on dividends for seniors living on fixed income, the return of the infamous marriage penalty for working families, and the alternative minimum tax ensnaring middle-income taxpayers. An average family of 4 with an income of $50,000 could see a tax increase of almost $2,200 a year. The President says he wants to stop the midnight tax hike for some taxpayers, but not all. He claims that he merely wants the wealthy to pay more. But the truth is that his tax increase proposal would especially hit small business owners. As someone who comes from a small business background myself, I understand that many small businesses pay taxes as individuals. Their income includes money that they reinvest in the business to expand and hire more workers. A big tax increase could harm the very businesses we are relying on to create more jobs. In fact, a new study by Ernst & Young suggests that the President's tax proposal would cost more than 700,000 American jobs. Mr. Speaker, what lane will you choose? I urge the House to pass H.R. 8 and prevent a tax hike for all Americans. I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Myself 10 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
When you look at Mr. Herger's district, he's standing up to protect 180 people who have income over $1 million, sacrificing a middle-income tax cut for 285,000. I now yield 2 minutes to the very distinguished chairman, former chairman, and a gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. I've never been so fortunate in this House to have the Republicans state the argument as clearly as they had this afternoon. And I think Wally Herger said it. It is possible, not that we're talking about a tax cut. People working every day trying to make ends meet, they don't know the wonderful tax cut that they are enjoying. But you bet your life, if we don't come together If we don't reach agreement, they'll understand what a tax hike is, and that's exactly what's going to happen to 98% of the tax-paying people of this great country. Taxpayers who work every day, who raise their families, who buy from the local merchants that keep small business alive, are going to find out, probably too late, that the Republican Party says you don't deserve the lower tax rate. And then they may ask, well, what's holding this up if everyone agrees that they should have it? Well, we're going to have to explain to the middle class what the Republicans are explaining to us, that somehow we are to believe that less than 2% of the population is creating the jobs and really supporting the economy. Well, I don't know where they've been or how they're going to come back, but they haven't been creating jobs and they haven't been spending and investing money. But even if there was a controversy, why in the heck are we holding hostage 98% of the people? If Republicans agree, and Democrats agree, and liberal and conservatives and even Tea Party people agree, that these people who work hard every day should continue to have this tax cut, then why in the heck don't we agree to give it to them? And if it ever becomes that we're in a political debate, and it's only about less than 2% of 100%, then let's fight like the devil over that and see who prevails. But it's not going to be hard for us to explain this. If you do this to the hard-working American people, shame on you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
I yield 3 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, I'd like to pause and just listen and think through a couple of the arguments that we've been hearing over the past couple of weeks from our friends on the other side of the aisle and from the President of the United States. And one is that people should pay their fair share. Now, that's an interesting argument, Mr. Speaker, and let's look at that a little bit closer. So if the President's will were to prevail on this, in other words, if this tax hike goes into place, then the top tax rate for some small businesses would be over 44%. Now, contrast that to the top tax rate that President Obama is proposing would be 28%. Now, all afternoon, you're going to hear a lot of things go back and forth, but you won't hear anyone contradict those numbers and that disparity, Mr. Speaker, because they are true. There is no sense in telling corporations you get a 28% rate and the top rate for small business is 44%. There's nothing fair about that. All right, well, let's look at another argument. Another argument is that this somehow closes a budget gap and this is deficit reduction and we're all about deficit reduction and let's have at it. Well, the little secret on the deficit reduction is, at best, the most generous estimate is this would take care of, what, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 days of spending? Maybe. But who would pay the cost for that? I'll tell you who pays the cost for that. The job creators and the people that are looking for jobs right now, Mr. Speaker. According to Ernst & Young and others that have looked at this, some estimates are that it would cost 700,000 jobs. Now, I know nobody that is willing to say, you know what, we just got too many jobs. Let's just thin the herd. There's too many people working. Let's thin the herd. There's too many people working, and let's do it because of Democratic dogma. We've got leading Democrats on the other side of the rotunda who have said, let's embrace the fiscal cliff. Let's just grab onto the dogma and go right off the cliff regardless of the outcome. Well, you know what? That's ridiculous. And we have an opportunity here to make some certainty, to move to the next year, not to move to the next year just for the sake of another year, but to move to next year to fundamentally reform our tax system, to create a more competitive tax code that is broad and fair and wise and well thought out, and that does what? That creates the most competitive tax code in the world right here in the United States. Mr. Speaker, it could be great. We could have a great tax code, but what we've got to do is create a year of certainty to move forward. I urge the passage of this, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I yield myself 15 seconds.
Gentleman is
You know,
recognized.
it's ironical that the gentleman from Illinois minimizes adding $50 billion to the deficit over 10 years of continued, which is your policy, continued the high income, $1 trillion. That's something you just shrug your shoulders at? I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, another distinguished member of our committee, Earl Blumenauer.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. It is an interesting question. Which lane are we going to choose? The study that has been
The nays are 255.
Mr. Schrader. Mr. Schrader votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 170 and the nays are 257. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to extend certain tax relief provisions enacted in 2001 and 2003 and for other purposes.
House will be in order. House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
I have motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
Yes, I am.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. DeFazio of Oregon moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 8.
The motion be
Without
suspended.
objection, so ordered. The clerk will dispense with the reading.
I object.
The objection is heard. The clerk will read.
Mr. DeFazio of Oregon moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 8, to the Committee on Ways and Means with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add at the end of the bill the following. Section 6, Findings. Congress finds the following. 1. Section 2 of this Act, H.R. 8, that extends tax cuts for millionaires instead of helping small businesses with tax cuts.
The clerk will suspend. The House will be in order. The clerk will read.
To invest in the future and create jobs. 2. Small businesses would be better served by ending tax breaks for millionaires and instead using that revenue to expand the small business expensing provision, which fosters investment in new plants and equipment. 3. This Act, H.R. 8, fails to extend expansions to the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, and it fails to extend altogether the American Opportunity Tax Credit.
Suspend. Clerk will read.
This tax relief encourages work, has lifted millions of Americans into the middle class, and helps middle-class families pay for the costs of higher education. Section 7, Application of Extension of 2001 and 2003 Tax Relief to certain high-income taxpayers. A. Application of Extension of 2001 Tax Relief. 1. Treatment of 25-, and 33% rate brackets. Paragraph 2 of Section 1I of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended to read as follows. 2. 25-, and 33% rate brackets. The tables under subsections A, B, C, D, and E shall be applied. A. By substituting 25% for 28% each place it appears before the application of subparagraph B. B. By substituting 28% for 31% each place it appears. and C, by substituting 33% for 36% each place it appears. 2. 35% rate bracket. Subsection I of Section 1 of such code is amended by redesignating paragraph 3 as paragraph 4 and by inserting after paragraph 2 the following new paragraph. 3. 35% rate bracket. A. In general, in the case of taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2012, I, the rate of tax under subsections A, B, C, D, and D on a taxpayer's taxable income in the highest rate bracket shall be 35% to the extent such income does not exceed an amount equal to the excess of 1. The applicable amount over 2. The dollar amount at which such bracket begins, and II. The 39.6% rate of tax under such subsections shall apply only to the taxpayer's taxable income in such bracket in excess of the amount to which Clause I applies. B. Applicable amount. For purposes of this paragraph, the term applicable amount means the excess of I, the applicable threshold, over II, the sum of the following amounts in effect for the taxable year. 1. The basic standard deduction within the meaning of Section 63C2, and 2. The exemption amount within the meaning of Section 151D1, or in the case of subsection A, 2 such exemption amounts. C. Applicable threshold. For purposes of this paragraph, the term applicable threshold means I, $1 million in the case of subsection A, B, and C, and II, half the amount applicable under Clause I after adjustment, if any, under subparagraph E in the case of subsection D. D. Highest rate bracket. For purposes of this paragraph, the term highest rate bracket means the bracket which would, determined without regard to this paragraph, be the 39.6% rate bracket. E. Inflation adjustment. For purposes of this paragraph, with respect to taxable years beginning in calendar years after 2012, the dollar amount in some paragraph CI shall be adjusted in the same manner as under paragraph 1C, except that subsection F3B shall be applied by substituting 2008 for 1992. 3. Overall limitation on itemized deductions. Section 68 of such code is amended. A. By striking the applicable amount, the first place it appears in subsection A, and inserting the applicable threshold in effect under section 1I3. By B, by striking the applicable amount in subsection A1 and inserting such applicable threshold. C, by striking subsection B and redesignating subsection C, D, and E as subsections B, C, and D, respectively, and D, by striking subsections F and G. 4. Phase out of deductions for personal exemptions. A. In general, paragraph 3 of section 151D of such code is amended. I. By striking the threshold amount in subparagraphs A and B and inserting the applicable threshold in effect under section 1I3. II. By striking subparagraph C and redesignating subparagraph D as subparagraph C. And III by striking subparagraphs E and F. B. Conforming amendments. Paragraph 4 of section 151D of such code is amended. I. By striking subparagraph B. II by redesignating clauses I and II of subparagraph A as subparagraphs A and B respectively, and by indenting such subparagraphs as so redesignated accordingly, and III by striking all that precedes in a calendar year after 1989 and inserting the following. 4. Inflation adjustment. In the case of any taxable year beginning B, application of extension of 2003 tax relief. 1. 20% capital gains rate for certain high-income individuals. Paragraph 1 of Section 1H of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by striking subparagraph C, by redesignating subparagraphs D and E as subparagraphs E and F, and by inserting after subparagraph B the following new subparagraphs. C. 15% of the lesser of I. So much of the adjusted net capital gain, or, if less, taxable income as exceeds the amount on which a tax is determined under subparagraph B, or II, the excess, if any.
Clerk will suspend. Unanimous consent that further reading be suspended.
Is there objection?
No
Seeing none,
objection.
that reading is dispensed with. The gentleman from Oregon is under the rule. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion. House will be in order. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank the gentleman. This is the final amendment to the bill. It won't kill the bill or send it back to committee. If adopted, the bill would be immediately amended and proceed to final passage. It's a pretty simple amendment. Now, it would create a tax break for the real job creators in America, which are small businesses and middle-income families. A middle-income person with a job or a small business and enough money to go out and invest and buy products made in America, that's a key component of this, for their business, would be allowed an expensing, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman will suspend. The House is not in order. The gentleman may proceed.
The Republican version of the bill would limit expensing to small businesses to $100,000 a year for purchases of new equipment made in America. If this amendment is adopted, those same small businesses would be allowed to expense up to $1 million to purchase products made in America, which would put people back to work. Now, I know we're going to hear that the millionaires and billionaires, because this tax increase or restoration of the Clinton-era rates would only apply to income over $1 million. So a millionaire still gets the break on the first $1 million. It's only on income over $1 million would go to the Clinton-era rates. Now, they'll say, well, they're the job creators, and that would depress job creation. Now, let's think back to the Clinton administration. We had a 39.6% top bracket on the millionaires and billionaires. We had 3.8% unemployment in the United States of America, and we paid down debt for the first time since the Eisenhower administration. I'd like to go back to those bad old days. Now, we've been doing tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, for 12 years. Where are the jobs? Where are the jobs from cutting taxes on people's income over $1 million? They aren't creating those jobs. Let me give you two quick examples from my district, and they're typical. I have Palo Alto Software, small business. They make software for business startups. We contacted them, and they said, yes, we could invest way more, both in new hardware, new software, and other things that would enhance our business than $100,000 if we were given this expensing privilege, and we would put more people back to work. Or bulk handling systems. They make recycling systems in my district. Same answer. If you gave us $1 million of expensing, we would spend every penny of that on products made in America and put people back to work. So the bottom line is the Republicans want to limit these small businesses, these real job creators, to a $100,000 deduction when they could use $1 million expensing and put more people back to work, because their premise is that the millionaire, the person who got, hundreds of millions or more in income, that having them pay more taxes on their income over $1 million will create more jobs than the small business. I don't buy that. I don't think the American people buy that. What are these? There's no limit on what they can do with their huge tax breaks, their very expensive tax breaks. They can buy another vacation home in the Caribbean. They can buy a Lamborghini. Paris Hilton can go on a shopping spree in London or Paris. This bill limits the expensing and the purchase of equipment to products made in the United States of America. I want to see things made in this country again. I want to put Americans back to work, not people overseas. And it's time that we admitted that we can't afford to continue the tax cuts over $1 million of income. It would also reduce the deficit over 10 years by $29 billion after we create jobs, after we give this expensing privilege to small businesses. So the choice is yours. You can stick with those who have income over $1 million, or you can side with small businesses and American workers. You decide.
The gentleman from Oregon has expired. The gentleman from Michigan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in opposition to the motion.
I rise in opposition. It's clear that my friends on the other side are committed to raising taxes at any cost. And does anyone believe that they're going to use that to reduce the deficit? We'll just see more wasteful Washington spending. This isn't a solution. America's at a crossroads. We've had 40 months of 8% unemployment. What do we get from them? Not a solution. We get a political ploy. And I appreciate my friend from Oregon touting the benefits of the Clinton administration when we had a Republican Congress. But let me just say, I want the advice of former President Bill Clinton. He said extend all of the current tax rates. Extend them all. But let me just say, this would gut tax reform. Say yes to tax reform. Say no to raising taxes. Say no to this motion to recommit.
Time of the gentleman from Michigan is expired. All time is expired. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, ask for recorded vote.
Gentleman requests a recorded vote. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise and remain standing. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of H.R. 8 if ordered. The motion to suspend with regard to House Resolution 750 and H.R. 4365. This is a 15-minute vote.
And it's the vote on the Democratic motion to recommit, the last chance to change the bill before final passage. The bill, H.R. 8, is the extension of the Bush-era tax cuts, the 2001-2003 tax cuts, for another year. This is a 15-minute vote, and a vote on final passage coming up next. Also still to come, a vote on a bill debated earlier imposing additional economic sanctions against Iran and Syria. In Washington today, House Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy said that yesterday's victory by Tea Party-backed candidate Ted Cruz in the Texas Senate Republican primary runoff was an indication that what happened in the House and during the 2010 elections was starting to happen in the Senate. He also talked about the tax cut bills and about the presidential election. We're going to show you some of his comments in his conversation with political journalists, hosted this morning by the Christian Science Monitor.
You mentioned that that in California at this point the party doesn't have a single statewide elected official in the legislature. You're within a whisker of losing even a third. For those of us who've watched that over the years, it's pretty clear that one of the biggest reasons is the alienation of Latino voters from the Republican Party in California. And on the national front, that same pattern seems to be developing, and a lot of it has to do with immigration. Are you going to try to bring up an immigration bill next year, and what would it be?
Well, any immigration bill that you do is going to have to be a bipartisan. You've watched into the Bush administration, one was tried and not able to achieve. It is a big challenge for both parties. It's a big challenge for our nation as a whole. We are a country of immigrants. We want to be able to maintain that. We want to be able to maintain and protect our borders. At the same time, we want to still be the magnet that people want to come to as a world. It is a challenge from all. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but if you take that issue away and you look at Congress as a whole, I'm not sure Congress, regardless of the issue, can take big, massive bills, because I don't believe the trust of the American people like these big, massive bills. So you may have to break it up into different portions of the issue and take segments to be able to move forward.
Historically, on that issue, others as well, but that issue particularly, when you take up the pieces each get defeated individually. And the only way to pass the bill has been to come up with an overall package where everybody gets something and nobody gets everything.
Well, that's the same thing people say about approach bills. You got to be in these big omnibus, and we
haven't got a single one passed through both houses, so that argument sounds pretty good, actually.
Well, no, that's the Senate's problem.
Well,
all right, you could dislike Congress like the rest of the American public. I do too, but I want to change it. So I mean, if you're going to judge based upon all the past Congresses, that's fine. But I wasn't here,
right,
and the one thing
how would you do immigration?
Well, let me finish my question, if I may. Thank you. We've passed 7 approach bills singular, so that's different, isn't it? That's different than when the Republicans controlled all as well, too, isn't it? So if we've made gains, and if we have a plan to make gains that way, I think you should give us credit when we do what we say we'll do. I don't know exactly what the immigration bill will look like, because I don't see a coalition there on both sides to be able to get it done. But I believe if you're looking for principles and frameworks to make it happen, it's going to have to take bipartisanship. And if I look at the structure of what has gone through the House in the last pass part, big comprehensive bills die. And what am I going to judge about that? I've watched a Republican president and George Bush at the end put a big comprehensive bill, try on both sides, and it died. So my goal is to solve problems. So I rather learn from somebody else's mistake, because I don't have enough time in life to make all my mistakes and learn from them. So my past experience, what I've studied within Congress, these big comprehensive bills die. So if I want to solve a problem, probably going to have to take it by pieces. And I think in the last...
Take first.
Well, you're judging based upon a next Congress. Let me see what the makeup of the next Congress is and what's the biggest issue to drive.
David? Yeah. 2 quick ones. First, you guys got a deal on a CR yesterday, and I was struck by the fact that the people pushing for the 6-month CR, which I don't think anyone was talking about a few weeks ago, were the most conservative members of the House and the Senate, and especially, obviously, in your chamber. Could you talk a little bit about that, how that process went, and sort of their involvement? The second thing is on the sequester. You talked about a framework for tax reform. It's also sort of a framework going forward for on the spending side of the ledger too. Obviously, the sequester falls into that. You've had a lot of Republicans traveling around, several Republicans traveling around the country talking about this week. How do you see Congress dealing with the sequester over the next few months? How do you see that process working out? How would you like it to work out?
Okay, just so I remember, I got sequestration and I got the 6 months.
You're conservatives on the CR. Yeah.
Okay. And the 6 month, it was interesting. One is, no one can sit back and say, okay, government's going to be shut down, and you've watched both sides come together. Reid and Boehner announced to be 6-month continuing resolution. There was a drive with inside conservatives that wanted 6 months instead of 3 months. I don't think there was ever a debate whether we'd get to a CR. And you set the number, 1047. I mean, from one standpoint, you've looked where you've been able to control the growth of government from that perspective there. So you have some victories. The argument between 3 months and 6 months, everybody looks at, you've got a lot of looming things before us, from tax increases coming, sequestration, could be another debt limit. This could all hinge into a lame duck scenario. If you could have a new presidency, new Congress, new Senate, 6 months gives a little longer time. Some conservatives will say if you put it out further, it's not everything collapsing at once. So the argument being giving yourself a little more time to do things if everything's around gives you some flexibility. Doesn't mean you can't do things earlier. Just came from both sides of the aisle thinking that's a better way of going about doing it in a short time. Sequestration, if you watched what Republicans have done in our budget, we took up and dealt with sequestration. You know, it was just a year ago we cut $497 billion from the military. Those are planned cuts, though. And when you go to cut the military, it's really programs you want to look at when you make cuts. You can't go into the military and say, I'm going to cut $500 million. When you take your house payment, you can't send them 10% less next month. See what happens when you do. You can't cut programs just 10% and across the board. Panetta says this is a problem. Most everybody says it's a problem. We've been trying to find ways that we can solve this. Members have been going around. We put it in our budget. I think there's a coalition of Democrats and Republicans on the Senate side trying to build something. I know Harry Reid said he won't bring it up beforehand. But it's almost an education to America of what sequestration means. So we believe we found other places that you can make the cuts and do a better plan scenario of what our military looks like. But that issue, I believe, will continue to grow. We'll go into the framework of the election in November. And I would hope we'd do something sooner than instead of putting everything in the lame duck. Being the whip, I don't look forward to the lame duck, but it's what will have to get done.
Mr. Gizzi?
Yeah. Thank you, David. Congressman McCarthy, it sounds from listening to you almost a slam dunk that Republicans in the House are going to extend all of the Bush tax cuts and aren't going to back down. If that happens, and if the Senate, in turn, votes to extend only 98% and the House stays firm, could you picture a scenario where the American people are upset at Republicans for holding up the entire process by not backing down?
Well, I can see the American public upset for Washington as a whole of, one, cutting another 710,000 jobs out of an economy where growth continues to slow. We've had 11 recessions since World War II. This is one of the longest lasting recession, and I believe it's based upon the policies of Washington that extended it longer. 82 was a much deeper recession, because if you look at double-digit inflation, others, if you measure the growth out of 82 compared to now, we have more than 14 million more jobs. Stimulus, what did it do for us? But let's take that question and what you just gave me. 2 years ago, that same question rose to the American people. The makeup of Congress was a little different. Democrats controlled the House too. 139 Democrats in the House voted to extend it. The President wrote in his signing that you should not raise taxes in a down economy. 86 of those Democrats still reside in the House. Are they going to flip-flop and think something's different? Bill Clinton believes you should not raise taxes in a down economy. Ernst & Young, independent study, says 710,000 more jobs lost. If we're serious about changing this economy and making America competitive again, eliminate some of the uncertainty. You extend it and reform the entire tax code that unshackles us and lets us compete. I think the American public will be tired of continually short-term and taking politics over people. I mean, if the President said 2 years ago it was wrong, why is it right now? And if this is right, did this come from his business counsel? Well, no, because he never has time to meet with them. He's had more than 100 fundraisers. I think that's what the American people get tired of. They're tired of the gimmicks. They're tired of all the process that you find in Washington. Just solve the problem and move on. And that's what we're trying to do.
Speaking, moving on, we've got about 20 minutes. We're going to try and squeeze in the following: Mike Doyle, Robert Schlesinger, Mark Shields, Jen Bendry, Molly Hooper, and Ed O'Keefe. And with that, Mike.
Congressman, blame the Senate for everything that's wrong with Congress. I'd like
no, there's a lot.
Something that's stymied the House so far. You represent an agricultural district. The constituents want a farm bill. Your caucus doesn't seem to know what it wants. Could you lay out the roadmap and timing for farm bill consideration, and will you have to get an extension?
Well, thank you for that question. If I go back and I study the House, I like to do that as a whip. Farm bills and transportation bills come out of committee. But they are 5-year bills. Committee studies these, and these are the big items of those committees. The floor itself doesn't know, because you go late into the night. I think the last amendment in the Farm Bill was, what, 2 a.m.? King put something, it became controversial at the same time with people there. You don't move them directly to the floor. You allow both sides to see what's in them. Maybe that's different in the past Congresses, and you just put something out at 2 and you bring something to the floor. I believe we'll get the Farm Bill done, and one thing I think that has started working better between the House and the Senate is conferences. Every time we've gone into conference, we've gotten back out. Maybe not in the perfect timeline, but we have. Same thing with transportation, same thing with FAA. That's something much different. Before you didn't go to conference. What you will find today, and because the Democrats' Farm Bill last time did not deal with disaster, it only took it to 4 years because they extended spending on other items, we're going to have to go in and fix that. So this week, we will deal with the disaster because of what's gone on out there, especially for the cattle, and take care of that. Farm Bill does not expire till the end of September. When we come back, we'll find a way to move to get into conference and come back with a full bill.
Can I just, what do you mean by done? Do you mean reauthorized and completed through conference by the time the current bill expires on September 30th?
I always have goals. That's my goal.
Can you say a quick sentence before we go to Robert about farm problem in your district, how badly your district has been hit by the drought?
If you look at the old saying in California has always been whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Our water comes from the north and comes down to the south. Much of our drought, and we've had drought for years, is more done because of man-made decisions about whether you can pump based upon an environmental issue. I have communities that are just outside my district, inside of Jim Costa's current district, where you've had 40% unemployment. Any of you ever eat a baby carrot? Okay, 2 families in my district grow 80% of all the carrots in the country. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There's no such thing as a baby carrot. It's a big carrot that's chopped, we just charge you more, and it's healthier, right? It's innovation. Cesar Chavez is buried in my district. My district is Kern County. When the nation had a depression in the 30s, we had a dust bowl across the drought in the Middle East, in the middle part of our country.
Grapes of wrath.
It is the grapes of wrath. Yeah. People put everything in their trucks and they went to California because of hopes of a better future. Well, they came and they worked in our fields. Those people that were in line for food a year and a half ago, they're handing out food. Carrot capital of the world. There were carrots from China they were giving out. In America, in a breadbasket. And this is because water, the ability to pump and bring water down, a court decision based upon a fish that didn't originate from there, on the certainty of whether to bring. Again, it goes into the certainty. We've watched land get plowed under. We've watched these small communities, many of them highly immigrant communities with 40% unemployment. We've been hit with a drought that was made by man-made before, even when you had 136% of snowpack. Then you watch across the country the drought even getting worse for other reasons.
Robert?
2 questions on sequestration. You said that you want to get it done before the lame duck. What is the likelihood of that? And more broadly, you voted for the budget deal with sequestration a year ago, and you said that the defense cuts are a bad thing. Wasn't that the point of it? I mean, what's changed? Did you not realize that this was going to happen, or what's changed in the last year?
Well, based on your question, let's walk back and walk through the debt limit scenario. Inside the debt limit, the discussion became, if you want to raise the debt limit, then let's have the ability to cut as much as we want to raise. Speaker Boehner had many serious discussions with the President. There came a moment in time where leadership has to rise up and make a decision, not from parties, but from individuals, whether you can come to an agreement. The President decided he could not come to an agreement. Walked away from the talks. Boehner then turned to Harry Reid, laid out the framework. And Harry Reid asked for one thing. He says, I need a super committee. Well, why do you need a super committee? Well, I can't deal with the 60 votes. We had the last one. He said, I don't want people from the outside in it. Let's set this up. We said, well, how do you know you'll ever get it done? Well, if you don't, then what you'll do is go back to the Grand Rudman. We'll make the cuts for $1.2 billion if that's where you want to get to. So they'll make that so painful people will actually act. Now, in my study of the super committee, Republicans put a proposal out. Senate Democrats tried to come to a conclusion. House Dems never...
81, the nays are 246. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill.